David made his way to Hans's lab. He would most likely have the best understanding of this, and he wanted to check over his theory with someone skilled in the field before talking with Alaris. His path there was luckily not blocked or interrupted, and he found it within a short hour. Hans was there along with Noila. The two were working on different sides. David walked up to Hans, his back turned away from the door. "Hans, I need your help." Hans turned his head a bit to David, but didn't look away from his work. "I need your opinion on something a bit restricted," David said quickly then in a lower voice, a hope that Noila wouldn't hear them. "I need you to tell me which of the Spartan experiments would show the dangers of genetic engineering best." Hans froze. "Why?" Hans asked as he placed his tools in holders. "I have proof that Alaris's government is intentionally manipulating their population, and I have to tell her, our child is at stake," David said back, making Hans snap his eyes on him, carefully studying him. "You know the laws. We aren't meant to tell anyone. You would never be allowed on Earth again," Hans hissed. "Consider the risk in what you are suggesting. If you tell her, she will either reject what you are saying and tell the council, or she accepts. Then what? She comes and lives on Earth or Eden." His eyes showed a deep care for him and her, one held by a friend who knows the dangers. "She would be ostracized because you told her the truth about one of the worst things we ever did, and your child harassed and shunned because they are yours. Are you ready for that?" "Hans, she has to know. It affects everything. Humanity is their closest ally right now, but EDS doesn't know about this. What will happen if word gets out some other way? The public will demand we cut ties and leave them to fend for themselves again." David said a bit louder. "She needs to know the truth about her father, her brother, and a tenth of her population. Even her late partner is one of those affected by the manipulation. And then there is our child. They have a mutation that makes the code the matriarchs are controlling be passed down both by male and female. What will happen to them if they find out, I don't want my child to suffer, but I would take that over dead?" Hans watched him, a careful study of David's face, reading as much as he could, before letting a sigh go. "Fine, file X2193 James Colby. His was the worst outcome. But if you tell her, make sure she is ready. His fate was the worst," Hans finally said before taking up his tools again. "And David, when you tell her, pray to Gaia that she understands, because if she doesn't, she will hate you." David nodded. "Thank you, Hans," he said before turning to leave. David quickly got to the secure comms room, meant to receive messages that are marked as important or species-sensitive. Its array is separate from the main systems and heavily encrypted. David punched in a code to send a tight beam to Earth, and more accurately the EDS station near the moon. That was where he could get the information, and he would get his response within a few minutes. Not perfect, but the fastest way to get what he needed. His message was short, and to the point. He started with his EDS clearance code, then the file he needed, and a short explanation of his discovery along with his personal reason for the request, then sent it. He started to pace the room. He didn't want to do this. The Spartan experiments were bad at best and horrific at worst, but that was the actions of 7 different old-world nations, each trying to breed a super soldier, all of them failing, some of them trying again with new traits or delivery methods to alter the genes of the mother or father or both. Humanity had hidden the information from the Council and scrubbed it from most of their history. Only humans got to learn about it in college or around that time, with extra focus on those in biology courses. Hans was right. It is one of their darkest secrets. If you break the law about it, you would be exiled to a prison colony on Titan, and if you are lucky, the guards would stop the prisoners from killing you. Your family would be shunned and hated, and any friends you had would leave you. But the alternative was unacceptable to David. He would rather tell Alaris than hide the truth. The terminal blinked with a reply. "Transmission EDS is aware of the danger, and efforts to course correct are ongoing. Your child will be protected by EDS. Stay on mission. Inform your wife of the danger and request she accepts even if she does not understand. Finish the mission, David. We need to handle one thing at a time. End of transmission." David gripped the terminal, and the screen started to pop and crack at the power he exerted into it. His anger at the lack of the file and the fact they know about this deepened his rage. He had agreed to join them after the war because they said they trusted him. But they didn't even mention the fact that a tenth of the Xandrophanes population was genetically modified. He roared as he ripped the terminal out of its housing and broke it in two, sparks showering the area around him. His breathing was hard and fast, eyes looking for something else to break. But his eyes landed on the door as it was open, and a person blocked it. "David?" Em asked, fearful at the sight of him losing control clear on her face, her hand gripping the doorframe, ready to pull herself to safety should he try to attack her. David dropped the broken terminal and sucked in a hard breath, his legs bending him into a squat and hands covering his mouth. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Do you need something?" Emmy watched him for a second, the fear of him still there, her mental image of him still shattered. "Do." She pauses, trying to find her will to talk with him, her fear that she may trigger a new bout of anger or violence clear in her posture. "Do you want me to get Alaris?" David's body seizes at her name, a fear that he would have to talk with her now. "No, no." He struggles to speak while he lost his balance and falls backward, hands running through his hair. "Can I just talk with you a bit?" he says after a few seconds of breathing and staring at the broken terminal in front of him. Em takes a half step in, testing his posture, sizing up his possible actions to follow, but she knows him and walks a bit closer and closes the room. "Sure, what's going on?" she says, trying to force a calm and soothing tone. "You remember the chip Angela found?" he asks back his mind, trying to find a way to explain what he is dealing with. "Yeah, the biochemical inhibitor had to pass it by Maya just to be sure," Emmy says as she walks over to the other side of the broken terminal and squats down. "What about it? Angela didn't tell me where she got the scan." "It is in the neck of a Xandrophane on board, actually. It's in the neck of one in every 10, we think," David says, informing her of where they got the scan. "Angela and I believe it was used to limit the growth of certain individuals that are meant to be completely different. Those men are also adopted by different clans to keep the genealogical line from interbreeding. The gene is why Xandrodanes are normally smarter and stronger than Xandrophanes." Emmy watched him as he spoke, her eyes reading his tone and seeing his surface emotions. "So, you are trying to get something to confront Alaris about it?" she asked slowly, her mind conjuring a scenario. David shook his head and slowly took off his visor. "I am trying to protect our kid," David said with a cracking voice. "The gene they are controlling is only passed down through males, but our child has the code somehow, and theirs will be passed down even if we have a daughter." David sucked in a deep breath, tears forming at the ends of his eyes, a fear if he speaks his thoughts, then fate will allow it to pass. "If the Conclave finds out, they may try to kill my child or subject them to experiments. And I am terrified because I don't know what to do. EDS knows, but they didn't give me the file I need to convince Alaris." He crossed his arms and rested them on his knees, his head finding a place on them. "That is hard, but she loves you, and she understands you. She knows if you tell her something, it's because you need her to listen," Emmy says as she walks over and sits next to him, her arm wrapping around his shoulder and pulling him in a bit. "And if it helps, I wouldn't let those crones get your kid. I like you and Alaris too much to let anything happen to them, so tell her like you did before and she will listen." "I don't know that. She might decide those experiments are way more different than what her government is doing, or she may just decide that she needs to tell the council," David said into his arms. Emmy thought about it for a second, then patted his back. "Well, then we kill her," she said, with a cheeky smile for him as he snapped his head up to her. "Relax. In the time I have known Alaris and everything I have heard about her, she is not someone that rushes to conclusions, and more importantly, she loves you. So calm down, send her a message asking to meet up and tell her." David watched Emmy for a few seconds before wiping away some final tears and stood up, turning to her and offering a hand. "I fucking love that you are the one that found me, thanks, Emma. You are the kindest soul aboard." She takes his hand and lets him pull her to her feet. "Yeah, well, someone has to be on our team, just don't call me Jiminy," she said with a smile. "Also, I came to ask you to get your uniform cleaned. Your army one, Alaris's request, apparently. She likes you in uniform. She said something about being dressed as her savior." David chuckled at that. Yeah, I will. Emmy reached up and cupped his face, her eyes showing something David didn't expect, her care and love for him held back by an acceptance of their friendship. Just don't be an idiot and talk to her. I'm happy for both of you, she said before leaving quickly, leaving David staring at the door, his mind connecting dots of her interactions with him over the past year and a half. David, you're dumb fucker, he said, as her feelings for him were clear as day, and he didn't see any of it because of his personal emotional state. But the past is the past. David found Alaris's door intimidating. Gavi had said she was here meditating, but she would be done soon, his mind screaming at him to come back later. But his heart wanted to tell her now. His hand reached up slowly, his personal wants and his duty conflicted with his course of action. She had endured him telling her his mission, his attack and procedure, his eyes that had forced her away, and his grief. Could he really add this too, should he? However, his hand pressed the request, and his heart sank as the door slid open. She was standing by the closet putting away her ceremonial tray, her form covered by the long robes that reached past her ankles, and her hair had been braided up and held up, showing off the back of her neck, her tail swinging slowly. Her head turned a bit, her eye finding him, and gave him a nod. David drew in a deep breath and walked in. He was about to challenge everything she knew. He may very much be walking into the lion's den, but he must as he took 2 steps and closed the door. Alaris had turned around, her hands rested intertwined in front of her, her eyes watching and reading, a glint of understanding at his visage. Alaris, we need to talk. You asked me to be honest, and I will, David said in a hard tone. His hands removed his visor so that she could read him. Make sure there is no misunderstanding. We need to talk about our child. Alaris took a step towards him. Her face held strain, but her eyes showed curiosity and compassion. What is it, David? They are healthy and growing, she said carefully. David swallowed his fear and locked his eyes on her. He had a feeling that she was hiding something, and that she was trying to accomplish something of her own. Our child has the genetic sequence found only in Zandradins, he said, slowly picking his words. Her face lit with delight, and her hand shifted a bit as she took a step closer and reached out to him. I am so happy, she said as she hugged him, his own arms locking around her. We will have a beautiful girl. David locked in tighter. Her voice sounded resolute at the results, and her posture broke at her understanding, like she understood what that meant for them. I didn't say we are having a daughter, he said, his voice cracking a bit. She knew what her kind did. And I know what the code is for. He felt her freeze in his arms, a breath hitched as he spoke. And our child's code is different, and they will pass it on even if they are a girl. What? She said, her voice carrying a bit of panic as her hand gripped tight and claws pushed into his jacket. I don't know what you are talking about. Yevira feigns, Alaris, the species you are, and Kiga and every Zandradane on board, David said. She pushed away hard, his arms parting, stopping just at the edge of his reach, her hand out at the ready, claws out and flexed to strike, her eyes locked on his hands, her breathing accelerating, and fur pushing away, ready for battle. Why didn't you tell me? David asked in a calm tone, his voice carrying on his will to love her, holding back his anger, his visage a twisted reflection of his inability to trust her and his care of her, his hands gripped tight into fists and posture hardened to keep him from hurting her. He would not harm her, even now. I let you in and disclosed all my secrets. I grieved in your arms. I trusted you. So why? She said nothing, her ears pinning back at the aggression of his posture, her eyes flicking about him, weary of his next action. Why didn't you trust me? Did you ever trust me? David said, his voice cracking a bit farther away to growing fear. His vision blurred as tears came forward, but she stayed still, her posture unbroken from a readiness to fight, her eyes still focused on his hand, her mind concise of the threat he posed. David felt his heart shudder. She didn't talk. She was fearful of him, scared he would hurt her. Alaris, look at me! He roared, the volume high enough to snap her eyes away from his hands. Her face shifted at the sight of his visage, the fear that held her until now shattered, as the realization that he was not the danger. Why didn't you trust me with this? She shifted, her stance relaxed and her claws retracted. I do trust you. I just didn't know how to tell you, she said, her voice stalling a bit as she spoke. Then when? David asked, his hand wiping away fearful tears. When would you tell me? I don't know. I didn't think it would matter. She said, her voice was shaken by the shift in the air. David inhaled hard. Then why did you approve the surgery on Kianris? David asked slowly. Because you wouldn't have believed me otherwise, she retorted, but stepped back at the flash of rage in his gaze, angered by her belief that he wouldn't listen and accept. He inhaled hard. The anger he felt was not what he needed. You don't know this, but humanity has strict laws against genetic modification, he said as calmly as possible. I can't tell you why, but believe me when I say it was horrible. Some subjects were so unstable that they died in their mother's arms. Alaris, I love you and I care about you. But you demand I be honest. I didn't make the same request because I thought you respected me enough to be honest. Her eyes started to tear at the edges. I do love you, but this is not something that we are allowed to tell anyone. Our religion forbids that kind of tampering, and we don't tell the males unless it is one of them. Alaris drew in a shuddering breath. The conclave offers them a deal. He either allows us to chip their sons and stay quiet, or they are both killed. She lowered to her knees, hands covering her face. I heard them say it to my sire after my brother was born. He refused, and my mother killed him without mercy and ordered for my brother to be chipped, and I just hid, she said before breaking into tears, her fear at what she had witnessed. Alaris, what do you think will happen to our child? David asked, as he closed the distance and pulled her into him, his arms enclosing her. We need to protect them, so please trust me with things as far as you can, and I will do the same. But if the reason with break our laws, then say we need to trust, okay? She nodded in his arms, her hands wiping away tears, as an understanding of what they must do and the hesitation of their kind's respective laws had formed a wedge, one that nearly broke them. But she does trust him, and he does trust her. I'm sorry, David. I should have told you when we cemented our union, but I didn't think you would understand. David's hand found her chin and lifted her face to him. I love you, and I'm also sorry for scaring you, he said before kissing her, a deep and invigorating kiss, one that installs a wish for her happiness over himself before pulling away. I will always listen to anything you have to tell me. However, her face broke as the memories that she had buried rushed out, the fear and panic she had felt crashing on her. He said nothing and pulled her in, holding her tight with a reassurance of her safety.